Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar on our 2020 Winnebago Vista Motorhome. So we got our customer here that we just got done working on their motorhome, putting all those suspension parts on, and we just wanted to take the time to ask him why he came to eTrailer and why he was specifically looking for those suspension parts. So are you having an issue with your motorhome or anything?
No, it's just if you go on all the diagnostic things you read about the Ford chassis, it doesn't matter if it's my brand or 5 other different brand RVs, but that's their weak point, and you have the parts to install and sell. Plus, I trust the jobs you guys do, and I can always go back and look at your YouTube video to see, oh yeah, this wire fell off one part. I know where it goes because I've seen you put it, and I know you torqued it or you used blue Loctite or red Loctite.
Right.
So I know it was done.
Yeah. Well, and after you have had a little bit of time to drive it after all those components are on, could you feel a difference? Did it improve
last
anything?
night on the way back on your roads here, I was a little bumpy on the freeways with all the snow you get, and you could tell the suspension on the front end that I could feel it was a lot smoother. Nice.
Well, that's really good to hear. I'm glad that it's all working out. Do you have any questions or anything, any concerns about any of the parts that we put on?
This is a new vehicle, and the Ford recommends getting it realigned from after you've left the factory with it. So I noticed when we picked it up with 10 miles on it, the steering was 15 degrees off. It wasn't true center, so that means I have to get it realigned. And I was wondering on that steering stabilizer, are those nuts torqued, or are they just aircraft nuts that hold that steering stabilizer?
On the tie rod itself?
Yeah.
They're torqued down, but it's a pretty low torque, so once they get it aligned...
Okay, I'll probably end up calling Bob, and touching base with you guys when I go to do it, but I guess the lights and the getting it aligned is the most two things on a brand new rig, because when they say, they never tell you that when you buy it, but after you get back and read the book on the Ford chassis, oh yeah, I got to do that.
Well, and that is the nice thing about all the parts you did get, though, is that down the road there's no maintenance, so that is a plus. You can just don't have to worry about that besides the factory maintenance you got to do. But all the parts, no maintenance in them, so you can just enjoy your motorhome, continue on with all your trips, and not have to worry about all those little things.
And we both, I'm 72 and she's 63. We do crawl underneath and move it ourselves, and we do look, that, oh wow, these nuts need to be tightened. So we always keep track of what's going on underneath. So.
Oh yeah, a little bit of preventative maintenance goes a really long way. But yeah, glad you guys came down. Glad we could definitely help you out, and I guess I'll give you your keys back and you can be on your way. So here at eTrailer, we get a lot of questions about motorhomes, especially the suspension. Because let's face it, it's a really large vehicle with a lot of area for wind to catch. So while we're driving down the road, if a truck passes by, we end up getting pushed around because the wind starts pushing the side of the motorhome. Not to mention if we take a turn or anything like that, it's a really soft, mushy feeling, almost like a boat. It starts leaning and we get a lot of body roll. Well, that's a little bit nerve-wracking for some people, so we end up having an extremely tight grip on the steering wheel. We're really stressed and we can't relax. Not to mention everybody in the back's getting tossed around, really not an enjoyable thing. Now the whole point of having a motorhome is so we can go around, visit places we haven't been before, and take some family and friends with us. So it'd be really nice to be able to feel more in control and relax while we're driving our motorhome. And that's where suspension enhancements are going to help. Suspension enhancements are going to alleviate a lot of those symptoms that we have, that body roll, and then being tired once we get where we're going, because we end up shifting around in our seat, trying to compensate for that, fighting the steering wheel, all of those problems. So suspension enhancements are definitely going to alleviate a lot of those problems. But let's go ahead and take our motorhome on our test course, and we can go through each one of those symptoms and see which component is going to help with that. So as I come up to the bumps course, I'm going to be going about 5 miles an hour just to have a nice baseline. But the bumps here are going to give us a good depiction, especially on the alternating bumps here, of that rocking or that side to side, kind of that mushy feeling. Because as we go over, one side's going to go up and we get that rocking feeling and really see how it's going to affect us while we're driving. And I can already tell it's definitely rocking a lot even after the bumps. It's continuing to go and kind of sway back and forth. As we come up to the solid speed bumps, that's going to give us a good depiction of going over potholes or ruts in the road and really be able to tell what kind of feeling we're going to get coming through the seat. As you can see, that's a pretty harsh bump. You can feel it resonating through the seat pretty good. It's not crazy, but you can definitely tell that they're there. It's a little bit uncomfortable. As I come up to the slalom course, I'm going to be going about 10 miles an hour. I'm just going in and out of the turns. And this is really going to show us that side-to-side action and that swaying, or what I like to call that boat feeling, where we just feel like we're kind of floating around. And just even starting to come into the turns, you can definitely feel that swaying, kind of rocking feeling. Because before we actually start to turn, the motorhome starts to lean really bad. And genuinely just feels like I need to slow down a little bit. So after a long period of driving like this, I could definitely see how you would be exhausted from moving around so much, having to readjust, and again, having a really firm grip on that steering wheel. So here's what our Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar looks like once we have it installed. Now, our rear sway bar is meant to be an additional bar and work with conjunction with our factory bar. So we're not replacing it, we're just adding another one to give us that much more stability. Now the way the bar is going to help with that body roll and that side-to-side feeling is it's going to be attached directly to the axle at the bottom of the shock mount here, and then these end links are going to be attached to the frame. So every time the axle wants to move, it's going to be braced against the frame and it's going to try to stay nice and level. So it's definitely going to cut down on that side to side and swaying feeling, because it's always going to be fighting to try to keep it nice and level. And our Roadmaster sway bar uses all polyurethane bushings. We're going to use it on the end links here as well as the shackle mounts, so that way the bushings will have enough give so that it can move and rotate slightly enough, but at the same time they're going to be a lot more stiff and give us that a lot more support rather than rubber end links do. These are also going to hold up over time to environmental issues and things like that, like oil, road salt, gasoline, anything like that's not going to start to break these down, so they should last us an extremely long time. The bar itself is going to be made out of a 4140 chrome moly steel, so it is going to be an extremely stiff, thick bar. And the bar is going to be 1.5 inches in diameter, so it's definitely going to give us a lot of support, but again, having those polyurethane bushings is going to give us just enough flex so that the bar can actually move with the suspension. So an anti-sway bar really is going to do for side-to-side action what a good set of shocks does for up and down. It's really going to help, at least, if not eliminate, at least cut down a lot on that body roll, that side-to-side and mushy feeling. And if you really want full stability, Roadmaster does make a front anti-sway bar for our motorhome as well. And I would recommend that if you have a lot of body roll issues, because it's definitely going to help to have one all the way from the front to the back so we can have full stability. But now that we've seen what our sway bar looks like, gone over some of the features, let's go ahead and take it back on our test course and see how big an improvement it actually made. So now again, we're going to come up to our bumps course, and again, I'm going about 5 miles an hour just so we can get a nice baseline to compare it to our first run. And honestly, after that first bump, I can already start to tell the difference. It's a little bit more controlled. Don't get me wrong, the bumps are still there. Now, I feel like I can just relax a little bit. I can loosen up my grip on the steering wheel, and it definitely feels a lot more stable. Again, I can really relax a little bit. Don't get me wrong, it's not like driving a sports car, but the motorhome definitely feels a lot smaller than it did before, and it's just responding a lot easier. As I'm going in and out of the turns, it's reacting rather than leaning first and then turning. It's a lot easier to drive, and I'd have a feeling that a lot more people would be more comfortable driving this because it doesn't feel as big of a vehicle as it actually is. Beginner installation, we want to park our motorhome on a nice flat level surface. Now, most of us do not have a lift large enough to lift our motorhome, and that's perfectly fine because we can leave all the tires on the ground. We want to use our leveling jacks so we can have our rear axle kind of sag down a little bit, but again, we can leave the rear tires on the ground. Once we have it lifted up, we want to move to the inside of the rear wheel well, and we're going to be looking right against the frame. Inside the rear wheel well, if we go to the frame, right behind the rear tire, we're going to find a couple of bolts. Now these two bolts are actually holding a bracket in place. We want to remove the two lower ones. There's a total of 4. But we want to remove the two lower ones, so we'll take a 21mm socket and pull both of those out. Now, you probably heard that drop. There's actually a little keeper nut. It's got a tab on there, so we don't have to use a wrench to hold it, but just be mindful it probably will fall or be on the inside of the frame. So then we want to grab our frame bracket. It's going to have kind of an L shape and then 2 tabs coming down. That L section should have 2 holes in it. Those are going to line up with the 2 bolts that we just removed. So we want this section to be on the outside of the frame and that L section to curve right underneath it. So we want to butt it up against our frame and then reuse the factory hardware to secure everything down. Just lift our bracket up, line up the holes, pass the bolts through. And then on the back side, we'll take those keeper nuts. We want to at least get them started, and we can tighten out the bolts from the front. And once you have your bracket loosely in place, we'll tighten it with that same 21mm socket. And we're going to have these same bolts over on the other side, so we want to loosen those up and put the other bracket in over there as well. We're going to move underneath our motorhome now. We're right at the rear axle, and we're right where the shock bolts up to the rear axle. On that mount, you're going to notice that we have 2 holes that are going towards the front. Those are going to be 2 mounting locations, but in order for us to get our hardware in place, we actually have to remove the bottom shock. So we want to grab a 1 1/8 socket and wrench, and we can pull this nut and bolt out. And once you have the bolt removed, you're going to make sure you hold on to the washers. There will be a washer on each side of the shock. So you want to make sure you hold on to all of the hardware. Then we can actually just grab the shock, just kind of push it to the outside so we can get access to behind each one of these holes. Now for the top mounting location up here, we want to grab a 3/8 bolt. We're going to follow it up with a 3/8 flat washer. I'm going to pass it through. Now it is a little bit of a tight fit for the bolts to go through, so you may want to thread it in instead of just kind of smashing it in. But once you get it started, it does loosen up a little bit. It's a little bit easier to get in place. So now that we have that one in place, the lower bolt is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a cap head screw, and we are going to have another washer, except this one is going to have a notch in it. That way it'll clear everything. So just make sure we put our bolt through that washer, and then same thing, just pass it all the way through, making sure it goes all the way through the mount and that bolt. And once we have this one in place, we're going to move to the other side and repeat that same process with the same combination of hardware. So at this point we want to get our bar ready so we can mount it up to our motorhome. So we want to lay it out, and what I like to do is kind of have it ready of how it's going to go in. So I have it laying flat and the 2 arms are kind of pointing up. So if we come to that curved section on each end, that's about where our bushings are going to go. Now they're split bushings, so we can just open them up, slide them right over the bar. Before we put them in place, we do want to put some lubricant on the inside of the bushing. And I definitely recommend wearing gloves because this can get really messy very fast. But you just want to coat the entire inside of that bushing with a really good amount of grease. And that's just going to prevent any kind of squeaking or really annoying sounds while we're driving down the road in case any water does get in between the bushing and the bar. But once we have some grease on there, let's kind of open up that bushing, lift up slightly, make sure it's all the way on there. Then we can grab our clamp and it's just going to slide right over the bushing and fit into that little channel. Let's go ahead and repeat that for the other bushing on the other side. So now I definitely recommend having an extra set of hands. It makes it a lot easier to lift your sway bar up. But we want to lift it up and rotate it to where our clamps line up. And we want to slide it over the bolts. And then for the bolt on top, we're going to put a flat washer in place. And then we're going to follow it up with a 3/8 nut. Now on the bottom, we're still going to use a flat washer and a 3/8 nut. However, we're going to use another one of those cut washers that has a little notch in it so we can clear the shock mount here. Just want to make sure that flat section goes on there so it'll clear the mount and it isn't going on there all crooked. We're going to tighten up our hardware. We're going to use a 9/16 wrench to hold the nut on the bottom. And for the bolt that has a hex head, I'm going to use a 9/16 socket. For our cap head bolt down at the bottom, I'm still going to use that 9/16 wrench, but I'm going to be using a 7/32 Allen bit to tighten up the bolt. Once you have both of those bolts tightened, we're going to move to the other side and tighten the other side as well. So with our sway bar mounted to the shock mounts, we can take our shocks and we can put them back in place reusing the factory hardware. Again, just want to make sure that both washers are in place and you're coming from the outside passing your bolt towards the center. And you don't want to forget to put the other washer on before you put the hex nut on. We'll get both sides loosely in place, and then we can tighten it down using the socket and wrench. So now we need to get ready to put our shackle mounts in place. Now you can see where our frame mount is, and if you look at the holes, they're actually right in line with our leaf springs. So what we need to do is we actually need to lower our leveling jack so we can get this mount here to be below the leaf spring so it clears. You just want to keep in mind when we do lower it down, we are going to lose some head space under here. So make sure you can still get underneath here and access these, but we do need to get room so we can get a bolt through from the outside. So we do need to move it because the leaf spring's in the way. So we're going to grab our shackle mount. One end's going to have a bushing with an eyelet through it. We want to line that up with our frame bracket. We're going to grab the long bolt out of our kit, pass it through, and that way that shackle mount can just hang there, and we want to loosely secure it with a hex nut. And we're going to have one of these on each side, so we'll put the other one in with the same combination of hardware. So now on your shackle mount, you're going to notice there's 3 holes. We want to lift our sway bar up, and we're going to use whichever mounting hole gets our sway bar to where it's sitting the most level. And honestly, it's probably going to be this upper one. So we'll line up our sway bar and the shackle mount. We'll pass our bolt through coming from the outside going through that top hole, and then put another lock nut on the inside. And again, we're going to do that for the other side so our sway bar is nice and level and on the same setting as this side. Now we use a 15/16 or a 24mm socket to tighten up our hardware. Now I do want to mention when we tighten up these bolts, we only want to tighten it up enough to where our shackle mounts make contact with the bushings. We don't want to crush these bushings, so again, just tight enough to where it makes contact and a little bit of pressure on those bushings, but you don't want to crush them. with this side tight. I'm going to repeat that on the other side. Make sure we go back and tighten all of our hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. So it may be a little bit hard to tell to see the improvement of the ride quality, because the ride quality really is a subjective thing. It's about how you feel and the feel of when you're driving. I can honestly say I did feel like it did improve the ride quality of our motorhome. It makes it easier for me to drive. So if you are having some of those symptoms of swaying or a bumpy, uncomfortable ride, suspension upgrades are definitely going to make it a lot easier to drive and more comfortable and enjoyable for you to drive your motorhome around. With all that being said, again, I'm Rob here at etrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Anti-Sway Bar on our 2020 Winnebago Vista Motorhome.